So, what do fruit and flowers have to do with success? So, for today's Mindset Monday, I thought what I would do is take a long quote from Musashi's Earth chapter. I'm going to discuss the first part of the quote and then read the quote. And then I'm going to discuss the second part of the quote and then read the quote. And that'll be it. So, if you don't know anything about Miyamoto Musashi, and without giving a dissertation on him, Japanese swordsman 400 years ago, sat down towards the end of his life and wrote the Book of Five Rings. He is said to have fought around 60 duels in his lifetime. He participated in at least three battles. There's a lot we don't know about his life, but he was in a profession where you had to get it right the first time. Okay? So there wasn't a lot of room in his life for trial and error. And subsequently, what we see in a lot of his thoughts is Musashi was very interested in broad details. He wasn't real intrigued by nuance. In fact, I think it could be argued that he didn't like nuance. So this first quote is kind of an analogy for skill, and he's talking a little bit about other martial artists of his time. He lived in a time when a lot of instructors could found schools, and those instructors would not necessarily have the experience to really be running a school that you would kind of think of in that era. But because it was basically peace, they could get away with that. So there was a lot of theory. He saw a lot of things he didn't like, and he made some interesting commentary on it. I do think it's important to point out that Musashi didn't really have to earn a living during his lifetime. From what I understand, he never had an appointment, but he was like an important guest at one or two places throughout his life. And then he traveled a lot. So here's the first part of the quote. It says, "When you look at the world, the various arts have been tailored to be items for sale. Likewise, a person thinks of himself as something to be sold, and even the implements of these ways are proffered as merchandise. This mentality divides the flower and the fruit into two and makes much less of the fruit than the flower." Basically, what he's getting at there is the styles of the time were making more out of the aesthetics. They were promoting flashy technique. They weren't necessarily promoting direct principles that could get someone through a sword fight. So, using the flower and the fruit, I think that's a very interesting analogy. And basically, what he's alluding to is they both have their place, they're both important. In his view, valuing the flower exclusively over the fruit. In other words, really being concerned with the aesthetics and the flashiness of something and not making sure you had the foundation down solid, the functional part that you could use, that you could do something with besides decoration, wasn't the way. Musashi did not like things that focused on minutia, even if you look at examples of his artwork, because his artwork still exists today, or some of it does at any rate, in private collections in Japan today, 400 years later, paintings that he painted back then, sculptures that he made, and some hilts for swords, they still exist. When you look at examples of those, even with those, you can see that he was just very broad and very direct. There wasn't a lot of subtlety to it. It was broad and direct. From what we know of his life, I think he did appreciate finer things. He had friends who were involved in the tea ceremonies. Some people call it the tea cults. He knew about no drama. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Even from reading his text and not just things people talking about his life, you can see that he was interested in culture. But specifically, when it came to the way, swordsmanship, he was mostly concerned with very direct things that were going to work all the time. The second part of the quote: "In this way of martial arts, especially, form is made into ornament, the flower is forced into bloom, and technique is made into display. One talks of this or that dojo, teaching this way or that way, in an attempt to gain some benefit. Someone has said that the immature martial art is a source of great injury." Applying this to daily life, regardless of the subject you're talking about, you could be talking about a hobby, you could be talking about owning a business. Get the basics down first before you worry about nuances. It's fine to recognize nuances, but the basics need to be in place first. And aesthetics have their place. Flashy things, we could argue, have their place. We want to make sure we have the function down first. Don't make more of the flower than the fruit. All right, so those were some thoughts of Miyamoto Musashi from the Earth chapter. Go read a book.